Welcome. It's another edition of Steak, Bourbon, and Sports. This is the show where we eat steak, drink bourbon, and talk about sports. Along with my every week host, Jeremy Mandel, our special guest today.
Every single week.
It never gets any easier.
Every single week.
It's brutal. Luke Castle is our guest from Bourbon and Banter, and we're going to get into the future of bourbon. Is there a bourbon bubble? But Jeremy, how are you, sir?
I'm doing good. I got to tell you a story, though. Just warmed the cockles of my heart. So I've got a friend and colleague named Darren, who last week I've been like kind of sharing different whiskeys with him, and like the smoke wagon pick we talked about a few weeks back. I gave him a bottle of that for Christmas, and he's been drinking more barrel proof stuff. And he came into my office the other day, or I ran into him in the hall or whatever, and he goes, "Man, you and Ari, you ruined me." I said, "What are you talking about?" He goes, "Well, I had this bottle of Basil Hayden and I really liked it for a long time, and then you started giving me the stuff that you're drinking, and this 80 proof Basil Hayden tastes like water. I can't even drink it." So I'm here to tell you that this podcast is improving the lives of Americans.
Or ruining, depending on, I guess, the perspective.
No, improving. He was drinking Basil Hayden. It's improving.
It is funny how, like, sometimes you'll see, like, on Facebook or Twitter, somebody's like, "Hey, give me a good bourbon to drink," and you'll get, like, a bunch of people like, "Basil Hayden's, it's the best." It's like, no. I mean,
it's literally the funny thing about Basil Hayden is in order to be technically legally classified as bourbon, it has to be at least 80 proof, which is exactly what Basil Hayden is. So there is the least amount of legally allowable whiskey in that bottle than anything else you're going to buy.
You're such a
That
dork.
just made me very happy that we're out there, we're making a difference, we're improving the world.
You're a pretty
Have to
big.
start somewhere, right?
That's right.
You're a pretty big dork.
That's never been in dispute. But if I can bring some people along for the ride, then absolutely, yes, I'm here for that.
Luke, did you know that Jeremy Mandel is a sports media professional or former sports media professional? Did you know that
I
at all?
mean, you can use that term
this
for anybody, I
qualifies
guess,
as-
at this point.
No, like he legitimately. So, and shout out to Chris Bennett, who's the best. He points out that this is the 6th anniversary of the 2014 Spurs championship, which is a championship that Jeremy Mandel covered as a legitimate media member.
A press pass and everything.
Of ESPN San Antonio, asking questions, being on press
Yeah, I
conferences on
remember.
ESPN, live streamed.
It was funny. I remember game 1, which was the game where the air conditioning in the arena broke. You and I are sitting in that press conference. Dwayne Wade comes up, and I'm sitting there, and I told you I'm just going to be quiet. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not going to like get involved with these actual people who this is their real job and they get paid for.
Yes, you did say that.
And then Dwayne Wade does this whole thing. Nobody asks him about the air conditioning.
That's right. He did the entire press conference.
In the entire time. And the guy's like, "Any more questions for Dwayne Wade?" It's like live on Sports Center. And I'm just looking around like, really? None of you professional journalists are going to ask about this? So I raised my hand. I asked Dwayne Wade, had he ever played in a game with conditions like that before? You were giving me like the biggest death stare of all time because I thought potentially getting you fired.
You haven't been fully vetted.
And the best part was they replayed that, me asking Dwayne Wade a question on SportsCenter all day the next day, and people thought I wasn't doing it. Like they thought that I had quit my real job and I'd become a professional journalist because I
was asking questions at a press conference.
I was asking
questions.
the NBA Finals press conference on SportsCenter all day. So yeah, actually, yes, I am a professional.
Did
you ask if the locker room was stocked with ice cold Gatorade too, or what was your next line?
Jeremy actually asked legitimate questions the entire time.
Yeah,
in some cases, more legitimate questions than many of the members of the media, because, like, you have to remember,
yourself included.
Very much so. I mean, I'm the king of asking stupid questions. I just like to ask questions for the sake of asking questions.
Well, you remember the Popovich deal? I think this was game 2. which is the game the Spurs lost.
Yes,
And
Popovich, the moral equivalency,
so,
the moral authority for everybody. Everybody should listen to Greg Popovich, who's all about
America's coach.
He's all about being inclusive,
right.
And all about
except for Ari,
except for members of the media, in which he consistently dresses down.
We're coming down the little elevator.
We don't have to tell this story.
Oh, I'm telling the story. We're coming down this elevator. It takes you from the media area to right outside the press conference. And Popovich is always the first one at the press conference because he wants to go directly from the game to the press conference, get it done with, and do whatever the hell else he does. So usually, if you're not like one of the first people down there, you're going to miss Pop entirely. So Ari and I are riding down this elevator trying to get there fast so that we make the Popovich deal. And Ari's telling me what question he's going to ask Popovich. And the question was, Coach, you said the ball stuck. Is that really as simple as it was? Was it just the ball stuck? And he tells me this in the elevator.
My question was way better than that. Let the record.
No, I just watched it like a week ago. It was on my little time hop anniversary thing. It was fantastic. So we're in the elevator. Ari tells me this. Yeah, here's the question I'm going to ask Popovich. And what did I immediately tell you?
Don't ask that question.
That's right. I told you, don't ask that question. He's going to say it's a stupid question. He's going to give you crap in front of the United States of America on live television. And you go ahead and you ask him the question anyway. And what I said was going to happen is exactly what happened. And then, Jay Moore
made fun of me the next day.
Jay Moore's radio show the next morning, he just made fun of you for like a half hour.
And now he's not even hosting a radio show anymore. So there you go.
And now, who won now?
Yeah, that's right. Make fun of me. Otherwise, you might be hosting a live stream on YouTube with a really cool guy like Luke and some Yahoo named Jerry Mandel.
Yeah, I think you're the clear winner here.
All right, so Luke Castle is our guest today here at Steak, Bourbon and Sports, and we're talking about sort of the future of bourbon. Is there a bourbon bubble with Luke Castle of Bourbon and Banter, which is a great publication. Check it out, bourbonandbanter.com.
Luke is one of the few things dorkier than Bourbon Podcaster, and that's Bourbon Blogger.
That's very accurate.
Yeah, but he's a bourbon blogger for a legitimate bourbon publication. We're just bourbon podcasters. I mean, we're on a legitimate network, but not like a legitimate bourbon network, It's not like the same thing.
It takes even less of a commitment to start a bourbon blog. I mean, I didn't even start it. I just contribute to it. I didn't have to buy any recording equipment or set up a Zoom call or have any kind of enterprise software. I just get to write and hit send, and then I'm done.
This freaking microphone cost $70 and Ari didn't pay me back or anything.
It's true. It's very true. Just write it off in your taxes. So,
there you go.
Luke, you wrote an article in September of 2016 about a bourbon bubble, which, I mean, essentially what we're talking about is supply and demand has caused a crazy, price situation because there's not as much of a supply for bourbon, which obviously takes years and years to make. Some cases many years, and some cases less years, but that there's less of a supply for a greater demand. But over time, with more and more distillers investing, more and more smaller distilleries coming about or distributors coming about, it's going to create a greater supply, which will meet demand and therefore create a bourbon bubble. So this was in 2016, nearly 4 years ago, almost exactly 4 years ago. So where are we in that?
We are still in a bubble.
Bubble is still building.
Exactly, it's grown quite a bit. I'm still surprised by it because I grew up in a town of 4,000 people in Southwest Minnesota. I live in Minneapolis now, so I'm slightly more. Well, I moved to a more cosmopolitan city. I'm not any more cosmopolitan myself, but I'm usually the last one to try things. I'm not the guy that's discovering things. It's just not my style. So I assumed that by the time I went crazy in the bourbon world in like 14, 15, and 16, I'd been drinking it longer than that, but really started to go off the deep end at that time, that I was just the last one to know. And turns out I was maybe not the first, but certainly on the front end of it for a change. So look at me being a trendsetter all of a sudden, but it's certainly changed. It's continued to grow. I keep seeing, secondary prices skyrocket, and even through the coronavirus shutdown and unemployment being where it is and people struggling in a lot of cases, I thought for sure finally an economic slowdown would be the thing that hurt prices, but they've only gone up more since this all went down. So, and more people come into the, I hate to use the word hobby because at the end they were just drinking, but come into this space every day. It's a hobby, yeah.
Drinking can be a hobby.
It is.
There's a thin line there between hobby and problem, but it's a hobby.
Well, how do we measure that? Is it the number of bottles you own, the spend? I mean,
I think if it was a real problem, you wouldn't be accumulating bottles.
Yeah,
it's a good
very
point.
Much so. I would say it's definitely not bottles you own, but rather bottles you drink per day, perhaps. It's a good indicator. Anything over one, and you might have gone beyond hobby.
Is 300 bigger than one?
Yeah, exactly.
That's
when your kids know that the FedEx guy is usually bringing you bourbon, then that's probably a hobby.
Yeah, no, I got yesterday for the first time. My daughter ran up to me, Daddy, you have a present on the porch.
She must think you get presents so often.
Well, and I have to give her presents to make it all
offset.
Yeah, like we had some Paw Patrol bath squirter things tonight because I got an Old Commonwealth decanter. So
every time you get bourbon,
not every time.
I gotta get her a gift.
Not every time. And look, I'm getting the more expensive present here, but not every time. But I can't have her thinking I'm the only one around here that gets gifts.
No, you got to balance that out once in a while. Take it for some ice cream.
There you go.
Yeah, that's right.
Because then you get ice cream too. My kids are aware of what I call the dad tax. When they get a treat, I get a little bite. So that's when they get something, I get a little something there. But to go back to your question,
for life in America.
They have
exactly.
They haven't done like the kid tax when you're drinking bourbon. Like, hey, I got to try it. It's part of the tax.
Someday,
for sure.
Part of me, we're talking about an odd subject here, but someday I hope that my kids get into the hobby, or one or both of them, who knows? But if they don't, I don't know what I'm going to do with all these bottles because there's no way I can drink them all. So they're going to be doing
the bubble better not burst then.
Exactly. You
got to get your money out of this.
So what have you learned, I guess, since writing the article in 2016, which again kind of hit on the supply and demand, and at that point it looked like at some point supply would catch up to demand, and therefore the bubble would burst. So what have you learned since then, and do you think that there will be a bubble? Sorry, do you think the bubble will burst?
So bubbles don't have to pop; they can fizzle, right? I mean, they can gradually get the air let out of them. So we'll see.
Also, you work in the financial sector, so this is you're double dipping here with this commentary.
I am a little bit, consumer preferences change all the time. I mean, if you go back to the 60s and 70s, and the thing about being able to not really predict, but know if you're in a bubble, you have to know what you were in the past and kind of look at what's happened. And in the 60s and 70s, 60s call it, bourbon was very popular. You had the World War II generation coming back from serving. They were now in their 40s and 50s, and they preferred whiskey over other things. In the 70s and 80s, that changed, and consumer preferences changed, and they started drinking more cocktails. Vodka became quite a bit more prevalent, and a lot of other beers popped up. Not to mention wine got more popular. I think it was 78 or 82? I don't remember when. Napa Valley won the international wine competition, and all of a sudden, America became a known place for producing great wine. So as that changed and other things took over, you had a glut, and that caused a bubble. And that's why you have these really ugly decanters from back then that contain some spectacular whiskey in a lot of cases. So we're back to the point today of production being higher than it was even during that glut. But there's something like 9 million barrels of bourbon aging in Kentucky alone today. When I wrote that article 4 years ago, it was only 7 million. So that's 2 million in
you did project that in the article because you wrote about the investments that all these distilleries were making because they saw how much bourbon was really growing in terms of interest.
Yeah, I mean, in that article, I think Buffalo Trace at the time had committed to invest $400 million in expansion, and they've bumped that up to $1.2 billion.
Right.
And distilleries in Kentucky are expected to, or already have started, or are completing projects totaling $2.3 billion over the next couple of years. So you're seeing a massive amount of capital go into that, and that's just the major distilleries. You've gone from, in 2000, there were only 24 craft distilleries in the U.S., and there's 2,000 today.
Wow.
So 24 to 2,000 in 20 years. And some of those folks are finally starting to make good whiskey. Jeremy and I are big fans of Blonde Brothers and Galena. You guys talked about it last week with Jarrett. There's some great craft distilleries finally with aged products. So I don't know that we're at the equilibrium yet because prices keep going up. But I think you're going to start to see some shelf products come back. And you are seeing one thing that I think is hilarious, and that some of the major distilleries start to do brand extensions. So instead of saying, hey, we don't have enough Old Weller Antique for everybody, not to pick on anybody, but let's mention them. Now, how many different Weller lines are there, Jeremy? There's 7?
Yeah, and they're all different color.
Yeah, they're slightly different proof of the same thing. So in some cases, you have distilleries kind of doing this artificial demand generation by taking the same thing and putting a different color sticker on it and, keeping the bubble inflated, I guess. So at some point, it's going to take some change in consumer preferences. Who knows? Maybe it's hard seltzers that finally takes down the bourbon bubble.
Yeah, for sure. I could totally see
that.
Has
anybody tried to age a White Claw in a barrel yet?
I think that's an experiment that we should definitely not do. Let somebody else do.
But plus, you'll always have the sort of supply and demand when it comes to Pappy or when it comes to some of the single barrel, store picks, where there will always be, a greater demand than supply. So I think as long as people will continue to drink bourbon, there will continue to be a tremendous demand for the more rare bourbons, right?
Well, you also got to have people willing to pay for it. So that's in this sort of environment. That's the one piece of this that I think is pretty substantially different than the 60s and 70s was like one of the thousands of craft distillers that Luke mentioned. They're putting young bourbon into bottles and charging you $100 for it, or $80 or something like that. Bourbon for years was the blue collar drink. Mm-hmm. It was if you're paying more than $20-$25 for a bottle,
right,
man, you're really going crazy here. Now you can't find anything that cheap. So that to me is the biggest area of difference historically. I think there's always going to be demand for whiskey, and there's always, to your point, Ari, if you're doing a barrel pick, there's going to be 150, 200 bottles ish in that barrel. So you're not going to be able to make more supply and call it single barrel. But what might change is people's willingness to drop some real coin on this thing. So I may want to buy whiskey, but I may not want to pay $100 a bottle. I may want to buy the same quantity of whiskey. I still want to get 750 milliliters of whiskey, but I only want to pay $40 for it or $30. And there's plenty of product out there that meets that niche, but people are willing to spend more right now. So they are. So places like Buffalo Trace are able to put literally $1.2 billion with a B dollars into upgrades.
Yeah, in some cases you have kind of artificial supply constraints from the producers, like with Pappy, right? I mean, they could make more. There's barrels in the rick houses that are old enough that they could make more, but they know that it's a limited edition, a limited product. Clearly, there's a quality control aspect to it, so it's not all cynical that they're doing it, or there are cynical reasons behind their choices there. But in a lot of cases, they want to charge more, so they're going to make less of it. That's just supply and demand 101. The groups that we're in, Jeremy and I are in a couple different barrel picking groups and know each other through the whiskey community pretty well. I don't think the nerds like us are ever going to stop wanting access to those and being willing to pay for access to those. But some of the other people that are into it because it's cool right now may find something else at some point, and probably will. And I don't want to sound like the old curmudgeon that's been here too long and doesn't want to welcome more people into the space. I get texts from friends and neighbors and all sorts of people that are like, hey, I'm at the liquor store. What do you think of XYZ? Mm-hmm. And man, if you're just getting into it today, it's really hard to give good advice because there's nothing on the shelf. So I try to fall back on the really simple stuff that I know they can get that's tastes good and something I would actually drink too.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, the bourbon you go to any liquor store, the bourbon on the shelf is, I mean, and I'm not anywhere near you guys. I'm more of a novice, certainly in terms of bourbon. But I mean, when I walk up at other shelves at liquor stores, it's just you're at your basic level. So it's whereas maybe 4 or 5 years ago you could walk into a liquor store and find some decent stuff. It's almost like the secondary market has killed that because there's such a demand for it, where people will buy it up and then resell it at a higher price. So they basically removed it from the shelf for the most part, right?
Well, if you take like my favorite distillery, and we've talked about this, is Four Roses. Their single barrel picks that were bottled at barrel strength. At the time Luke said the bourbon bubble is about to burst, they were selling for about $55 a pop, and they'd sit on the shelf for a couple months before they sold the whole barrel. Now they're selling for $80-90 a pop and generally selling out in an hour. Mm-hmm. Just the demand has gone through the roof. And there's a dearth of barrel proof stuff that you can go to a liquor store and go get. There's some of those craft distilleries are releasing barrel proof stuff that sometimes you'll be able to find. But like, say, we talked about Buffalo Trace's expansion project, and Luke, you may think of something that's not occurring to me, but is there a Buffalo Trace barrel proof product that you could just go into a liquor store and get? I don't think there is.
No, I mean, E.H. Taylor barrel proof you used to be able to buy off the shelf, but that's long gone.
Yeah, that hadn't been the case for a while.
I mean, Stag Junior, I guess. But I'd say in the last year that's changed. That used to sit around forever. I mean, you could buy as much of that as you wanted even 18 months ago, and right. I don't see that anymore. And I start to see that have a secondary value, which means anything sitting there is going to go poof because it's a beanie baby or a pound puppy or whatever the latest trading thing is out there. Can't get them.
So Jeremy is both a bourbon enthusiast and aficionado, as well as a Disney enthusiast and aficionado.
That's right, I am. Yes.
So for people that are listening,
specifically though, theme parks.
Theme parks, of course.
I'm not like out trying to catch Onward for the 10,000th time in theaters.
That's a good distinction there. I'm impressed you made the distinction. It's an important distinction.
I like roller coasters.
Right, because you're not that into Disney movies. You're into them, just not that into them. It's the theme parks you're really into.
Yeah, like I'm as into Disney movies as any father of a 3-year-old girl is. I'm aware of all of them. I know most of the songs just from having them on and repeat in my whole life.
No judgments here, but yeah.
No, look, I'm sorry. My 3-year-old daughter likes princesses. What do you want from me? But
so on that,
real appreciation is the roller coaster.
So on that front, and by the way, we are, not only is this a podcast, which we encourage you all to subscribe and rate the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, but we're also a live streaming show on YouTube at youtube.com/Steak Bourbon and Sports. And so our friend Chris Bennett has advised some of the resorts in Disney that some of these NBA teams are going to be staying at. So I figured maybe we could take a quick second so you can give us an idea. So the San Antonio Spurs, your team, they're staying at the Yacht Club. How familiar are you with the Yacht Club? Not a good move? Not a good place?
I mean, it's fine. There's better stuff on property. Of course they stick the Spurs there.
The Blazers, Kings, Pelicans, Spurs, Suns, and Wizards are there. That is 100%.
They stuck the end of the – yeah, that's exactly right. They stuck the teams that are in last in the worst resort.
That's very much the blah hotel. What hotel do you want to be staying at?
You want to be staying – I didn't see – well, which ones are they, like, of anything, or is there, like, a menu of places?
I mean, they're in Orlando.
There's like, Four Seasons right there, and that's
There's
But I
Four
think
Seasons there.
It's the
There's
Disney. It's all Disney hotels.
Well, the Four Seasons is on Disney property there.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But there's also, I'd say probably the nicest Disney resort is probably the Grand Floridian.
Okay, that's where the Mavericks are staying.
Oh.
Thunder, 76ers, Rockets. Ooh, Rockets and Mavs. Your two favorite teams could stay at the Grand.
Oh, I'm done staying there.
You just can't wash that stink out from James Harden.
No, I'm not yet.
The best teams, though, are staying at the Gran Destino Tower. That's the
Oh,
Bucks.
that place is brand new. I actually haven't been there yet.
Yeah, it's the Bucks,
Apparently
Lakers,
it's very
Raptors,
nice.
Clippers, Celtics, Nuggets, Jazz, and Heat.
Yeah, that makes sense. Apparently, it's very nice. It's also far enough removed from the actual theme park that I feel like they can get their kids to think maybe they're not there.
Can I?
Unfortunately, go ahead. Unfortunately, the Timberwolves are at home.
It might be better than the yacht club.
Probably.
It's funny though, because it's like, in terms of the sports that I cover, that's really college football and the NFL. So it's like for the NBA, it's like just tell me when you're playing. Like I've heard so many reports that it's like they're coming back and.
Well, and honestly, that's how I feel about sports in general. Like this baseball thing is terrible.
Yeah, it's awful.
Just when you're ready to start, tell me. And until then, I'm really sick and tired. Like in baseball's case, it's about games played and how much money they're going to make. And I'm really not in the mood to hear about that. It's kind of like not a great look when there's however many millions of unemployed Americans for you to tell me that you can't come to a financial agreement.
Right. As legitimate as that might be, you're right. The optics.
Yeah, it's just
putrid.
Yeah, you got to take the temperature of the room here. That's not going to work. But tell me when there's a game I can watch.
Yeah. Well, and it's crazy how you just take for granted. Like I was hanging out with some friends at a pool, like at their pool, and it was like they have a TV out there, and it's like, remember when we could just like turn on the NBA Finals right now and like they'd be on, or like you could turn on the TV and baseball would be on. Like literally any day of the year, with the exception of a few days, you could turn on and there'd be live sports on. It's like, God, it's been like almost 4 months now, I think, without live sports.
Right.
It's crazy.
I think the PGA messed up. I mean, they can clearly adhere to social distancing on a golf course. And I can't think of a better thing to have on a TV in the background in your home office that you don't have to listen to it. You could have it on mute while you're doing all these Zoom calls and making phone calls, do whatever you do during the day. And you'd have more eyeballs than you get for the Masters for the Honda Classic, I bet. It's nuts. I mean, they completely messed up by not having those happen.
You're saying they messed up by not continuing to hold the tour because they could have done it throughout? Yeah, because the golf courses didn't close. I mean, most golf courses have stayed open the entire time.
And maybe I don't understand the revenue model there, but I always thought they made more on the TV contract than they did on the gate.
Totally.
It's not the tickets and the hot dogs and the beers in the stands. It's the TVs and the sponsorship, right?
Well, especially right now, you want to put your tournament on when there's nothing else. You're getting every eyeball in the country.
Yeah.
What do you guys
want to get the gamblers excited? I mean, why do you think they're all opening Robinhood accounts right now? It's because they have no sports to bet on. Put the PGA out there and let them bet on golfers and see how that goes. That would be spectacular.
Yeah, no, you got all these gambling addicts buying leveraged ETFs now. And
I do wonder, though, if it was just an optics thing for the PGA Tour, where they were just like, we could play, but it would just look weird if we continue to play and nothing else is being played. Even though I mean, your point's well stated. Like, I agree. You would have completely had the television sports audience.
Yeah, and I mean, the only thing I can think of, has anything really – I'll tell you what has continued through all this. WWE hadn't canceled a thing. And their ratings are in the tank.
Wow.
Interesting.
So it's completely the opposite of what I would have expected. But apparently people think that the crowd matters.
What do you think?
I think with PG, I don't watch wrestling anymore. I'm sorry. I'm definitely not going to poo-poo it because I understand people's.
He was about to say, "I'm sorry, I'm not
getting
8.
ready."
No. I did. I enjoyed it back in the day. I just don't watch it anymore. I'm going to shut my mouth because I know who I'm talking to here. But I think with the PGA, if they cut the purse and donate the difference to a local charity, like a food bank or something where the prize is still worth it not worth it. Again, it's all relative, but the prize money's still there for the players to show up, but you're doing some good for the local community with it. I think they could have very easily continued to host tournaments and continue to catch more eyeballs.
Yeah. All right. Well, Jeremy, there's your natural segue to your repeating weekly topic, which is.
You know what? I noticed you saying that with some condescension in your voice.
No condescension.
That didn't go unnoticed. And I'll have you know that after we did this last week, so last week I read a series of quotes, and Ari had to guess whether that quote was from somebody associated with the WWE or someone associated with the NFL. All week, people have been contacting me to tell me their score because they're playing along at home. I just one of me and Luke's mutual friends today was telling me, "Yeah, tell Ari I got them all right."
Well, he's impressive, whoever
That's right. Yeah.
It wasn't Jared Hudak after the fact? Hudak was it after the fact? Was it? He's like, I got them all right the second time around.
Now, so we're adjusting the game a little bit this week. This week it is WWE or Michael Jordan.
Ooh, that's a good one.
So
the king of hyperbole.
I got 6 quotes here, and you guys can both guess, and we'll see who does better. So the first quote: "My best evaluation comes when I look in your eyes and see how scared you are."
That's got to be MJ.
You going Jordan?
Oh yeah, it's definitely.
I'm going wrestling.
Okay, that's Michael Jordan. So Ari's on the board once. "Never say never because limits like fears are often just an illusion."
Wrestling.
Michael Jordan.
0 for 2.
Luke's 0 for 2. Ari's 1 for 2. "You got to eat lightning and crap thunder."
That's wrestling.
Shane McMahon.
It'd be so great if Jordan said that.
All right. "It's not arrogance, it's just destiny."
Ooh, this one's good. This one could go either way.
Yeah, they all could.
This one especially. I'll say WWE.
Yeah, I'm going wrestling because I don't think Jordan thinks destiny's a thing. I think it's his. He earns it.
Okay, so we're both going wrestling. It's Randy Orton from WWE. Ari, you're doing surprisingly better this time. See, Ari's 2 for 3. Luke is 1 for 3, I think. Is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, I got the last 2 right. I'm
That's
2
right.
for 3.
I'm 3 for
2
4.
for
He's
3.
He's 2 for 4.
Okay. "Sometimes you need to get hit in the head to realize you're in a fight."
Jordan.
Yeah, Jordan.
Michael Jordan.
That's the Pistons.
Yep. Let's see. There's one more. "He's not pointing to anybody. He's showing off how high he can count."
Jordan.
Man, that's a good one. I'm going to go wrestling.
Bobby the Brain Heenan.
Yeah.
We both got 4 of 6.
So for the second week in a row, Ari's percentage-wise in the 60s.
4 of 6 seems like it should be a higher percentage than 60.
Well, the math doesn't lie, Ari.
It's 80. In my book, it's 80%.
Well, that's kind of goes to my point.
Because like 4 of 6, 80. You got it. Cool.
Yeah.
What are you guys drinking tonight?
I am enjoying some 1969 Old Crow Chessman. I went Dusty. This is Fred Middick, who's a bourbon author, and I don't think he touches everything bourbon related. Declared this is the best whiskey ever made. I don't know if it's the best whiskey ever made, but it's very, very good. So
it's way up there.
Yeah, it's spectacular. And I was fortunate enough about 2 years ago to find an entire set of this. Got about 20 bottles of it, and I'm down to quite a bit less than 20. So I'm enjoying savoring the last of it.
Yeah. So just for some background, 1969 Old Crow, which is a bourbon brand, it was really in vogue to put whiskey into fancy decanters when you were selling it then. and they did a series of bourbon that was exclusively in chess pieces. There, Luke's holding one up right there.
Oh, that's awesome.
And you could make literally there were
An entire chess game.
And light ones and dark ones, and you could have a whole chess game with whiskey bottles. And it is, I don't know what the reason is or anything, but it is one of the very finest things I've ever drank in my life. It's fantastic.
It's crazy too, because it's only 86 proof, and you and I are both proof whores. Want it as barrel strength as we can get it, and they say it's 10 years old, but I think it's quite a bit older than that. And at 86 proof, it hits every note. And it is exceptionally dark.
For whatever reason, the lower proof stuff from back in the day, like one of my favorite things to drink is Old Granddad from the 70s and early 80s, proofed at 86, and it's fantastic. It stacks right up against barrel proof stuff that you'll buy today.
They still make Old Crow?
Yes, it is a far cry from what we're discussing.
Yeah, it's not exactly what it used to be.
What distillery?
Does Beam own them?
Yeah. Beam bought them in 1992, I think, when they bought all the National Distiller stuff.
Yeah. So, yeah, they own Old Crow, Old Granddad, all that stuff. And basically everything they bought from National Distillers is not as good as it was when National Distillers was making it. So, yeah. And Beam makes there's some things Beam does that are really good, just not that.
They took something that was just a butterscotch candy bomb and turned it into a big peanut bomb.
Yep.
I'm drinking Blantons, and this is from Europe, so it's straight from the barrel.
Ooh.
Nice. Yeah, a lot of people don't realize that Blantons does exist at barrel proof. You just can't buy it in the United States. They sell it only in foreign markets. I am having Bellamead's Honey Cask. They quite literally took bourbon and put it in a cask that had been holding honey. So it's a lot sweeter, a lot thicker. Pretty tasty stuff.
Bellamead's probably one of those that you can find in a liquor store, right? Pretty consistently.
You can find some of their product, not all of it. It's going to be almost impossible to find it at barrel strength, but they do some contract distilling. A lot of their stuff is from MGP, which we've talked about with other distilleries before. Bellamead does a lot of barrel finishing. So, all like barrels that once held sherry or barrels that once held cognac or all kinds of stuff. And they then, after it's done aging, whatever it's aging, they then put bourbon in it, and it takes on some of the characteristics of the initial fill. A lot of that you probably can find in your local liquor store.
All right. Well, thank you to Luke Castle. Follow him on Twitter at Castle44, and make sure to read everything he writes for Bourbon and Banter. Of course, Jeremy Mandel at Jeremy Mandel on Twitter. I am Ari Temkin on Twitter at Ari Sports. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast if you have not yet already at Steak, Bourbon and Sports. Give us a rating. It helps other people find the podcast as well. And also head on over to our YouTube page at Steak, Bourbon Sports. Subscribe to the page. We're on Twitter at SBS Pod and on Instagram at Steak, Bourbon Sports. But for now, Jeremy.
Fare thee well.